Welcome to the YouTube replay from our virtual Green Drinks October. For this edition, we welcome two experts in the field of renewable energy to discuss how you can heat and cool your home more sustainably. Big thanks to Daniel Vivian, founder of the Building Science Trust, and Chris P.Eng of Exicon Roofing and Solar. Enjoy this replay.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Green Drinks Ottawa. Many of you have been following us since April, where we've gone virtual. So actually, it's been an excellent journey. Love the Fox and the Feather, miss the Fox and the Feather. However, doing it virtually has helped us widen our audience and get people from across Canada. So tonight we should have some participants. I want to welcome those from Calgary, Toronto, Guelph, Rancho Santa Fe, Waterloo, Minneapolis, Merrickville, Newmarket, and of course, Ottawa and the surrounding area, which is our biggest group. So everybody, thank you for being here, and feel free in the chat box to let us know where you're from and what you do. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Raymond Demir, and along with my colleague Nick Heb, we are both with SmartNet Alliance. The Alliance is a group of businesses and organizations who collaborate on projects and initiatives to accelerate Canada's sustainable economy. For more information, of course, you can consult our website at www.smartnetalliance.ca, and Nick will put that in the chat box sometime tonight. We've recently launched some business courses if you're interested, if you're thinking of starting a business, so you can go and check out our business courses. That's also there. You can sign up for our newsletter if you want to have our news updates. We send out one monthly newsletter and sometimes a few extra email blasts, and the ones for Green Drinks. For those of you who are not familiar with Green Drinks, this is an international event that happens in about 500 countries once a month. So I imagine with the pandemic, some of them may not have been able to go to Zoom, so it must be less, but still, it's quite a lot. It's an informal gathering. For us, for SmartNet Alliance, about 4 or 5 years ago, we added a little bit of structure. People were asking us, what should we be doing? Is there a specific topic? So we decided to invite some guest speakers and start a registration process. So it's working out very well. Just a quick reminder, we are recording the session tonight, and Nick is going to be putting it up on YouTube in a few weeks from now, in about 10 days or so. So just to let you know. So tonight we are focusing on heating and cooling. We have two guest speakers. Both of them are SmartNet Alliance members. So the first one is Dan Vivian of Science Building Trust and Chris P.Eng from Exicon Contracting. So in a moment, Nick will introduce each speaker. And again, just a quick reminder, you can put questions in the chat box and we'll handle them after the presentations. I think Nick's plan is that we will take some questions after each speaker, and then at the end again, we can do that. So enjoy yourselves tonight, and I'm kicking it back over to Nick. Thanks.
Thanks, Raymond. Great to keep the virtual Green Drinks going. We've had quite a few good ones, and I did just post a link in the chat if you do want to take a look at some of the past Green Drinks. We've had ones on Smart City, Mass Timber, Canada's and the world's first all-electric mine, Smart Green Economy. So go ahead and take a look through. There's lots of viewing on YouTube there, and we'll also be putting this one out as well. So tonight is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. Every year when the seasons change, like we're going through now, you know, I do have to turn on my furnace like many people do, and I go through a lot of different, you know, breathing issues, and you know, I would love to learn how to heat and cool my home a little bit more sustainably, because, you know, in the summer, we're always cranking the air conditioning as well, and the seasons are crossing over more and more. So tonight, figure we'll talk a little bit about alternatives to that, which is a real game changer when you're looking at taking buildings to net zero in the next 10 to 20 years. And we've invited two experts in the field. We've got Daniel Vivian and we've got Chris P.Eng. So let's bring Dan up first. And Dan is the principal of the Building Science Trust. He's a mechanical engineer with over 35 years of experience in net zero retrofit planning, energy conservation, capital planning, and project engineering and maintenance supervision. He has worked in manufacturing, mining, and building science. He also teaches mechanical engineering at community colleges. He's conducted property condition assessments, energy audits, fund studies and net zero planning on homes, schools, buildings, and shopping centers. So without further ado, I want to give it over to Dan and his presentation, and we'll just get you to share your screen there, Dan, and then we'll get rolling.
Dan, you have to unmute yourself. Nick, you might have to walk over.
There, is that better?
Yes, that's
yeah,
better.
there we
That's
go.
good.
And we've got Dan in our SmartNet Alliance office, so want to welcome him in. And of course, we're socially distanced, but Dan, thanks so much for joining us. Looking forward to hearing a little bit more. I've been preaching heat pumps for quite a while and how that can be a game changer. And I know it's been on your tongue quite a bit. So over to you to get your presentation rolling.
Okay, so I'm going to share the screen here, and let's try this. And slideshow. I want to welcome everybody who's joined in tonight. I'm really impressed to hear that there are people from all over the country. And by the way, we offer a service for all over the country. At some point, we hope to offer the service in the States. We don't yet do that, but we certainly can offer a little free advice, and you're welcome to look at our website for some other advice. Bonsoir, mes amis. Mon français est très mal, pardon-moi. So I am studying French though. I'm doing a little bit better. Tonight, my topic's just even a little bit more broader than just heating and air conditioning. I am going to talk about how to move an existing building to net zero. So the majority of that is heating and air conditioning, but there's also the electrical loads that are in the building and the domestic hot water loads. So I'll go into that in more detail. Thank you for attending. I hope that you'll be blessed by this presentation. So about me, you know what? Nick went through this. I'm just going to skip through this, and we'll talk about what's the reasons to reduce greenhouse gases. So it's more violent and intense storms. There's mass extinctions of wildlife due to the sudden climate changes. There's the melting of the polar ice caps. There's global sea level rises, which cause flooding in low-lying Pacific and coastal cities. And there's droughts that are happening in some areas of the world. Central America, Syria, North America. Environmental mass emigrations, and so things like South America. People in Central America people in Central America that are facing droughts have to move to an area that's more sustainable. So they end up moving north, and that's what causes emigration into the States that is problematic for some people. It contributes to war. It was a contributing factor in the war in Syria. There was droughts happening in the countryside. Because of the droughts happening in the countryside, people moved to the city, and then that extra influx of people within the city had created issues, social issues, that were contributing factors to the war in Syria. So there's a whole number of issues that we're starting to see that are related to climate change. And so, and climate change is related to the greenhouse gases that are being produced by the burning of fossil fuels. So how does that work? Well, it works like this. Here's an illustration of the sun beaming radiant energy through the Earth's atmosphere. The energy shines down on the surface of the Earth and warms the Earth. The atmosphere contains a layer of carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide, the high-intensity solar rays at the 8,000 degrees Celsius that the sun shines through the atmosphere, they penetrate the atmosphere easily. They shine onto the Earth. A lot of that radiation would be normally re-radiated out. But with carbon dioxide, it captures the lower energy radiation that re-radiates out. It captures it in the atmosphere, and it warms the atmosphere up. So this is the same effect that you have in the northern climates, Canada, northern US. When you go out to your car in a shiny February afternoon, sunny February afternoon, and the sun's shining through the car windows, it warms the interior, the upholstery, and plastics and other things, carpeting, within the interior of the car, but it only warms it up to 15 degrees Celsius versus the 8,000 degrees Celsius that the sun shines in. That radiation re-radiates out at 15 degrees Celsius through the glass, but it's not strong enough, not intensive enough to pass through the glass. So the glass itself acts like a check valve. It's a greenhouse that's happening in the car. And the same goes on with our atmosphere. So that's the mechanism that causes global warming. Where does the greenhouse gas come from? Or the greenhouse gas is actually carbon dioxide and some other molecules, but the ones that are man-made, the ones that are changing the equilibrium of the Earth, are things like that are caused by the burning of fossil fuels primarily. And we have fossil fuels burnt in significantly in things like coal mining, coal plants, industrial processes, land transportation, landfills, fertilizer, oil production, and buildings, air transportation. All of those things contribute to greenhouse gases. How significantly? So just in approximation, there's about 40% that of the carbon dioxide greenhouse gases that are man-made comes from transportation. So this is North American, or more generally, this is the first world. And in the first world, that's the major contributors to greenhouse gases and climate warming. So about 40% comes from transportation, about 40% from buildings, and the other 20% comes from industry. And oftentimes you'll hear different statistics. You'll hear a statistic, well, what about agriculture? Well, what is agriculture? Agriculture is made up of things like tractors and pickup trucks and stake trucks and transports, all on the transportation side. And then on the building side, agriculture is made up of barns and farmhouses and sheds and warehouses and things along that line. So that agriculture is mainly made up of those two more basic contributions, transportation and buildings. The other 20% is mostly industry. So who's the problem in creating these? We are. You and I are the problem. We cause global warming by fueling our houses and our buildings with fossil fuels. And our cars, trucks, planes, and ships with fossil fuels. So the transportation and the building side. So I want to talk to you about how we can economically move our buildings to renewable energy. Renewable energy has no greenhouse gases in the during its operation. Some embedded energy in the components that make the renewable energy, but they are not as significant as the operating energy. And as our grids get greener, that percentages drop off. So tonight, I'm going to talk about the 40% portion, which is the building portion. So here's the approximate greenhouse gas emissions for a 2,000 square foot house in Ottawa, depending on the fuel that you use. So for fuel oil, propane, natural gas, electricity, you can see how they decrease in order. Anywhere from fuel oil, which is very dirty, over 1,000 tons over 20 years, sorry, the 100 years of its life, versus, solar is down at 0 for the operating greenhouse gases. Electricity in Ontario is pretty green. It'll be down at 160. So here's an example of a house that we did a net zero study on. And these are the measures that we found to improve the house, to move the house to net zero. And these are typical. These are very typical for all houses. We moved the space heating to a heat pump and electric, and we moved the domestic hot water to a heat pump and electric power supply. The electricity, we moved to net metered solar power, right? So you may have objected to paying electricity prices, but we fixed that by using solar power. Solar power comes in at almost half the cost of electricity in Ontario. We add, on occasion, insulation to poorly insulated spaces, and we seal poorly sealed houses. And the poorly insulated space, what I'm talking about is if your basement walls have no insulation on it, that's poorly insulated. I'm not talking about a basement with some insulation. This is no insulation. Or if your attic has very little insulation, then we would top it up. And for poorly sealed houses, think along the lines of farmhouse drafty, that poorly sealed. Those are the ones, and I'll show you the reasoning why. It comes in here. So why do we use solar power versus electricity? This graph here shows the costs of various fuels and the costs of solar power and the costs of solar power and heat pump combinations, or the cost of the energy conservation measures. So we'll illustrate it by this way. So we start off with electricity in Ontario. So this was in last March, before the electricity rate went down. It was around 15 cents a kilowatt hour. Thankfully, Doug Ford has moved that to lower. It's now 12.8 cents a kilowatt hour. Cost of solar power comes in at just a little bit less than 8 cents a kilowatt hour. And you say, well, I thought the sun's free. Yes, the sun's free, but the initial capital is not free. And so what we've done is we took the original initial capital costs of the solar panels and all the electronics that go with it, and we divide that by the number of kilowatt hours that the solar equipment will produce over its lifetime, and we come up with this dollar per kilowatt hour figure. So the electricity comes in at, was coming in at 15 cents a kilowatt hour. The solar power comes in at just a little less than 8 cents a kilowatt hour over its life. And that's how we compare these two. And then we say, let's compare it to let's look at heating, and we'll compare heating to the fuels that you normally use for heating. So that'll be propane, fuel oil, and natural gas. Those are the fuels, fossil fuels that are in red, and electric resistance heating, that's the one in blue. So natural gas is a very inexpensive fuel. It comes in at 5 cents a kilowatt hour. That's why everybody in the city who has natural gas available to them uses natural gas for heating, for space heating and domestic hot water heating. If I put together the same analysis for energy conservation measures as I did for the solar panels, I take the cost of the measure, divide it by the number of kilowatt hours that it saves over its life. Now I can compare those to fuels. So insulating blinds, a special type of comfort board insulation, insulating poorly insulated foundations, or upgrading attics, and some other measures, they come in cheaper than natural gas. And we do those analysis and we figure out what's the best energy conservation measure for your money. But I also want you to look over at the left at triple glazing glass. So that's 3 panes of glass. We would typically not recommend triple glazing because there are other measures that are better. And that's these measures. That's that combination of heat pumps and solar panels together. That comes in the same range as natural gas. A little bit slightly less expensive, but about the same range. So it's competitive. So initial capital costs, solar panels are not inexpensive. Anyone who's got estimates on them will understand that. But you don't pay for the power after you've installed it. And overall, there's this combination of heat pump and solar panel, slightly less than natural gas costs. So how does that affect your house? About 65% of the house is in space heating, 15% is in domestic hot water, and 20% of the house is in the electrical load. So we're going to use that insight from the previous slide to apply to our house loads. So these are typical house loads for Ottawa and actually across all of the majority of Canada. That's climate zone 6, climate zone 5. So here we can see the difference that a heat pump makes. A heat pump reduces the amount of energy that is consumed because the heat pump is actually gathering environmental energy. So in space heating, you can see that the difference is about a 60% reduction in the space heating, slightly larger on the domestic hot water heating, and of course a heat pump doesn't change your cost of electricity, your consumption of electricity. This is a slide on how a heat pump works. I'm going to skip through that. We're a little bit tight on time. Here's the important slide that I want to show everybody. This is comparing the costs of various fuels, of natural gas, to heat pumps and the decrease in greenhouse gases that are produced by using a heat pump. Remember the last slide, heat pumps reduce the amount of energy that's consumed. They reduce the amount of greenhouse gases that are produced. That's what we're trying to get to. And here's the significance of it. So over the life of a furnace, the energy and furnace costs combined would be around $33,300. The yellow bar is the capital cost, so the cost of the furnace itself. The red bar below it is the energy costs over its lifetime. The best value, so, and that would produce over the 20-year lifetime 103 tons of greenhouse gases, your single furnace. The best value is actually a heat pump with a natural gas backup. Heat pumps don't work in the extreme cold, and by extreme cold I mean about -20 Celsius and lower. They use a backup heating, and there's two options. Typically, you can use natural gas if it's available, or electricity with electric resistance. So that cost was $27,300 over its lifetime, and a reduction of down to 48 tons. That's an over 55% reduction, because there's two inputs into that. You're using a lot less energy, and in Ontario, our electricity is very green, very sustainable. So we're also getting the two effects of that. It changes across the country. In Alberta, you want to be careful about this one. You could end up increasing your greenhouse gas productions. And for anybody in a region outside of Ontario, I'm happy to do the studies. In Quebec, it's even better. So a heat pump with electricity will end up costing you more with electric backup, but you end up reducing your greenhouse gases even further. And if you go to a heat pump with electricity backup, but you switch to solar power. Now, I'm not saying that the solar power drives the heat pump, but you install the solar panels, and whatever energy that you use for the heat pump over the entire year, that's going to be offset by the solar panels, right? So you'll end up not paying for electricity because your solar panels are going to feed back into the grid. So you're going to net out with no electricity costs, costs. And that form of electricity is called net metering. That comes in at 31,000, and zero greenhouse gases are produced in that measure. This is how we move the space heating to net zero. Now I want to go back just a moment here. This one right here, when we go to a heat pump with natural gas, that is most everybody's typical 2,000 square foot home furnace has natural gas supplying to the furnace, and a central air conditioning system. If your air conditioning system is a heat pump, the difference between a heat pump and a central air conditioner is 3 valves, a reversing valve, 2 check valves, and controls. That increase in performance is a $700 increase. For $700 difference, when you need to replace your central air conditioning system, for $700, install a heat pump. It is cheaper than natural gas, and you'll reduce the greenhouse gases by 55%. This is a no-brainer. Everybody should be doing this. Any homeowner who has central air, who needs to upgrade that central air, should be installing a heat pump and running the heat pump. In the country, this is even better. So the fuels available to you in the country are fuel oil, propane, electric resistance. They're, remember from the first graph, they're all very expensive. So in comparison, we're talking about over $75,000 over the 20-year lifetime of the furnace. In comparison, comparing that to a heat pump with electric backup or a heat pump with solar backup, we're saving in the order of $40,000 over its lifetime. Very significant. And on the greenhouse gas side of things, you know, fuel oil being the largest contributor of the fossil fuels, we would drop down from 179 tons over that 20-year lifetime of the furnace, down to 21, 9 tons, 0 or no tons, depending on whether it's electric resistance backup, electric resistance heating, sorry, a heat pump with electric resistance backup, or a heat pump with solar. There's a similar decision with domestic hot water. Domestic hot water, unfortunately, you're not going to save money on that one. I'm going to go through this quickly. It's on my website, and at the end, you'll see the website for a matter of time. The electricity decision is over the lifetime of solar panels, your utility supplied costs, electricity costs, would be in the order of $27,100, or your solar supplied costs if you use solar power for your electricity, and that's that net metered solar power. You're down at $16,900. And the greenhouse gas contributions over that time frame would be 9.3 tons versus no tons on the operating emissions. When do we change our components? So I want to illustrate that we don't recommend you go out and change everything right away. We recommend that you change into the more sustainable equipment at the end of the life of your typical heating and cooling appliances and and your overall electric supply. So a furnace lasts around 22.5 years. You'll replace that with a heat pump. Domestic hot water, you can replace that with a domestic hot water heat pump, or electric heat pump, and then back it up with solar power. A boiler, offset it with solar power, not back it up. A boiler may be around 20 years, the central air conditioning 20 to 25 years, and a split AC 15 years. We do those studies. We tell you when it's time to move your equipment over. We look at the nameplate data and serial number and find out how old your equipment is, and then make our recommendations. That will, over time, create a plan to reduce your greenhouse gases that look like this. We start off with the base case at around 40,000 kilowatt hours per year and around 6,000 kilograms of greenhouse gases. And depending on the measure, we say right at the first to offset your electricity with solar panels. And then we say whatever sort of energy conservation measure that makes sense. So in this case, it was air sealing and insulating blinds. And then we switch your domestic hot water, in this case, because it was the domestic hot water needed to be changed before the space heating. If the space heating needed to be changed, we flip those two around. We'll do that when at the end of the life of the equipment. And we set out a plan so that you can move your house, your building, off of greenhouse gases, off of fossil fuels, off of greenhouse gases, and it's economical at the same time. So again, you and I are responsible for 80% of the solution, and industry will work diligently at the 20% that's remaining. So change your car to an EV. I didn't talk very much about that portion of it, but that's 40%. Change your car to an EV and get rid of 40%. Over time, move your house to net zero. It's going to get rid of that 40%. Tell your friends about that. Advocate for legislation within your community to assist you and your neighbors to do the same. And industry is going to get rid of that remaining 20%. I spent the first half of my career in industry. I know that they can do it. So tell two friends, they tell two friends, and they tell two friends, And together, we're going to eliminate greenhouse gases. Any questions? That's the website, Building Science Trust. If you go on to the Building Science Trust, there's a tab there that says Why Net Zero. Go to that tab. Under that tab, hover over that tab, you'll see a number of sub-tabs. Read those in order, and those sub-tabs will tell you exactly what I just told you here, but in a little more detail. So, any questions?
Yeah, Dan, and I'll just hop into let everybody know how we're going to handle the questions. Thanks so much for a great presentation. It's so great to hear some of the research and findings that you've had. You know, it's super exciting to hear, you know, that our solution may just be changing everybody to solar and heat pump. Obviously, you know, it's going to take some effort and take some work to get there, but you know, if we can do it, then it looks like it's a path towards you know, meeting some of those climate goals and things like that. So there's been quite a bit of chatter in the chat box there. So it's been great. Your presentation has gotten some people thinking. And I just want to remind everybody that we do have a solar expert coming up next. So if you do have specific solar questions, you may want to hold off for Chris. And then at the end, we'll do a bit of a general discussion. So right now, I want to give everybody a chance to ask their questions right directly to Dan. So if you want to just post in chat, I have a question, I'll come around and unmute you. Now, I'll ask to unmute you, you'll have to unmute yourself as well. So just make sure you do that. And I know we had, I think James had a question first here, James Madigan. So James, we can unmute you here. Let me find you.
Yeah, hi, great presentation. I was wondering what you do about fresh air intake, because once you tighten up the house, there's a need to continue to breathe and check your humidity, and you have to do energy recovery on that. Is that part of your planning process as well?
So I talk about existing buildings right now. This is the way to move existing buildings over. This is not new construction. This is talking about passive house or super sealed houses. No, there's not an economic reason to seal up a house beyond around 3 air changes per hour. So if you're in that range right now, we wouldn't recommend sealing it up any further and causing you to install an HRV. You know, our houses lasted for 100 years, 1980s style houses without that. Now I know this is a bit controversial. I know that a lot of people are concerned about indoor air quality, and I'm not talking about that. Yes, there's a good reason for indoor to do that for indoor air quality, but there's not an economic reason to do that.
Right, but without actually going and checking the code and regulations, I do know, like dealing with commercial buildings, that's always a big consideration these days when you're doing new building or upgrades, is ensuring that there's enough fresh air coming into the building to meet required standards, which, you know, would some of those standards do come down to apply to residents as well.
So in this case, I'm talking about houses, and I know what you're talking about in the larger commercial buildings. Typically, the building code is a little bit gray in that area because most retrofits are not required to follow today's existing code. They're required to follow the building code of the day that the building was constructed. And typically, unless the building is very new, there wasn't a code that said you must seal to a certain level.
Right. Well, again, I guess one has to go back and make sure they check with the current codes and bylaws and whatnot.
Yeah, but no, typically you wouldn't have somebody, a homeowner, asking your HVAC contractor to go check a code. You do, you do require that in larger commercial buildings, and there's a series of requirements that say what those buildings are, whether it's, you know, in the order of above, you know, 6,000 square feet, a number of different floors, what the fire code requirements are, that sort of thing. But typically in a house, an existing house, the HVAC contractor is not going to codes and checking.
That's great, Dan. I'll just jump in because there's a few other questions, but we'll also be around after the presentations to go a little deeper into some of this stuff. A few more minutes. Art, do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself? You should be good there.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Of course, as you know, I've got a ground source heat pump, and you didn't mention that at all in your analysis. Do you want to just make a quick comment? I know the costs are higher, but
I sure do. So it was in there, Art. It's one of those bars that I showed in that Pareto analysis, and it's very close to an air source heat pump. The ground source heat pump has higher efficiencies. It's really hard to say whether the ground source heat pump is better than the air source heat pump, and in terms of the economics. There is a condition that I have to use a ground source heat pump. If I'm designing a house that's over 3 floors, I can't do it with an air source heat pump. I need the higher efficiency of a ground source heat pump. So those areas in the glebe in Ottawa, I typically would have to use a ground source heat pump in the glebe. The 3-story brick houses in the glebe, in case Catherine McKenna is listening. And then the difficulty with ground source heat pump is the capital costs are higher to install the well in the first place. Now, there is a possibility that ground source heat pump may end up to be cheaper, but that would take a couple of cycles of life, you know, in the order of 25, one cycle is 25 years, second cycle would be 50 years. I don't have that much time left. So to answer that question.
Don't sell yourself too short there, Dan. You never know, right? That's great, guys. Thanks so much. I didn't know if Gautam is still on the line. I know he had a question on chat. Gautam, are you there? You may have dropped off the call. I also had a question from Mary in chat. Mary, did you want to come ahead and unmute?
I'm here.
Oh, there's Gautam. Sorry, Gautam. Go ahead and ask your question.
What's the question?
Yeah, the question is like to Dan is, have you been able to achieve some passive house consumption? If you have, like, what is the best you have been able to achieve in Ottawa in terms of kilowatt hour per meter square?
I don't have that figure available right off the bat. There's a large difference in reaching net zero versus passive house. Passive house has a lot of other considerations. The comfort of the house, the air quality of the house, and with those considerations, it's more expensive. So, but there's certainly a number of people who are interested in that. I'm not familiar enough with passive house to know if there's a passive house retrofit standard. So again, I'm talking about retrofits, not new construction.
That's great. And we had one from Mary. She's wondering about passive solar heating. So maybe you can say a few words about that.
I'm doing a project right now in bidding on a project in Carleton Place where they have too much passive solar heating, and they can't cool their second floor's house, and that they have to install we're either going to have to change the ducts and get more air, or we're going to have to add tinting to the windows to reduce the amount of heat, which I'm really, really reluctant to do because of, you know, in the wintertime, we want all that heat. So there's quite a balance in there. It's nice to get as much heating as we can passively. And there's some techniques that I'm going to try and use with that house in Carleton Place, like shades over the south-facing windows and things along that lines to retain as much passive heating as we possibly can.
Fantastic, Dan. Great to hear about some of those projects. I'll leave you off with one more because we want to leave some time for Chris to go deep into solar and talk about how we can combo with those heat pumps. So I think this goes well into it. Adele asks, is it a wise idea to wait for a change in government and maybe a reintro of green rebates like those canceled by Ford? She says hard to afford all these upgrades. So a thought on that, and then we'll segue over to Chris. Mike, I know you had a question, but we'll slot you in on the next one if that's okay. And great to see all the chat going on about all the technologies, and let's keep that up. So over to you, Dan, for that last question.
So I typically wouldn't wait for the incentives. You never know when an incentive is going to come by. It has more to do with what piece of equipment do you have that's ready to need to be replaced. So does your furnace need to be replaced? If it needs to be replaced, then that's the time to really consider heat pumps and solar panels. I wouldn't hold up for solar, waiting for incentives on solar power. You can move on to solar power right now, and it'll be cheaper. The payback periods are 11 or 12 years. The only reason I would hold back on solar is if I felt that I wasn't going to live in my house for 11 or 12 years. Like I said, the other major pieces of appliances, like heat pumps, like air conditioners, like water heaters, you know, if it's time to replace those, then replace those with these more sustainable and more economical measures. And that's what I do. We go into your house, we look at which pieces of appliances are going to need replacement, when are they going to need replacement, and then we work out a plan for you to go ahead with the replacement.
Thanks so much, Dan. And I know there's a few other questions coming through on chat, so we'll circle back. Dan's going to be around for the discussion after Chris's presentation and some questions for him. So I want to thank Dan so much. Just a reminder to stop share on your screen there, Dan, and we'll segue over to Chris. So I first met Chris a couple of years back at the R&D Innovation Center. His presentation on solar energy just blew my mind and showed me all the possibilities that are out there. He's been designing, selling, and installing commercial and residential solar systems throughout Ontario. Some of his past credentials include the Grid Edge Active Transactional Demand Response, or the Great DR with Hydro Ottawa. He's done the Chio Metro Dream of a Lifetime Net Zero Home, the Campanelli Net Zero Home, Tartan's Net Zero Home, 3 Climate Action Incentive Fund projects, NRCan's PV Planning Decision Guide for new home builders, and dozens of residential retrofits and microfit projects. So I'm happy to turn it over to Chris. He's a proud father of 2 wonderful daughters, and that's his motivation. And he's going to share us some tips and tricks and ideas about going solar. So over to you, Chris, to share your screen.
Thanks very much, Nick. That was really nice. I haven't been introduced like that before. That's fantastic. I appreciate it. I'll share my screen now to start the presentation. Can everybody see that okay?
Looking good, Chris. Thanks so much.
Right. Thanks, Nick. Just a brief introduction about Hexacon Roofing and Solar. Been in the solar installation business in Eastern Ontario for over a decade now. For residential installation, roof repair, roof replacement, commercial flat roof installation. And we're also now doing a lot of the operations and maintenance required from a lot of the installs that are now, year 10, year 12, replacing inverters, installing critter guard, cleaning up a lot of messes. There was a huge influx of solar installations that took place starting around 2009, when the feed-in tariff program was brought about by the McGuinty government when he was in the middle of shutting down the coal-fired plants in Ontario. And at that time, a lot of two guys out of the back of a truck with a Home Depot card were calling themselves solar installers. And they went around and messed up a lot of roofs. And that led to, consequences later on and confusion and misinformation, particularly in the real estate industry, where often after I've spoken with an end user about going solar, they'll speak to the realtor and they'll tell them it's a bad idea because it will wreck your roof. That's no longer the case. You want to deal with a credible installation team. That's why I am now working directly with Exicon. They did a lot of my subcontract in the past for my net zero homes, for instance. So in this past calendar year, I joined on full-time with Exicon. I'm very glad I did. So a lot of what I do all day long is talk about solar. I often bore my friends with it in my off hours, but during regular work hours, it's a lot of the same conversation on a regular basis. And it's a lot of dispelling myths. And there's a lot of them out there. I mentioned earlier about, wrecking the roof, for instance. It reinforces the structural integrity of the roof. You're also, because we're going perpendicular into the truss, so that helps with the reinforcement. Also, the solar panels are now absorbing both UV as well as all of the elements, whether it's sleet, hail, what have you. So it actually is beneficial and helps with the lifespan of the roof. You don't want to do an install on a roof that is older or needs to be replaced. Again, and that's one of the other reasons why I'm on board with Exicon, because we do both the roof as well as solar installation at the same time. And now we're actually doing air source heat pumps. So just a bit of a caveat on Dan's presentation, which was great. Some of the other things that I deal with on a regular basis as far as dispelling myths is, well, in Ottawa, the panels are going to be covered in snow for, months at a time. Well, with net metering, you're going to be over generating during the good periods of the year. So it's not so much about snow and cold, it's more to do with daylight hours. So when we're all driving to work, well, we used to, driving to work in the dark and coming home in the dark, you're not going to generate a whole lot of solar electricity during that time of the year. So typically from the middle of December until the middle of February, our production numbers and our projections will say, during that time of the year, you're going to be pulling from the grid. It's not something where you're going to be doing a whole lot of generation at that time. The other side of it is, well, sometimes people want to clean off the panels. And on a flush mount residential installation, I advise people to stay away from them. Do not do anything with the panels. Don't get up there and try and squeegee them or use Windex or anything like that. On a flush mount residential system, you're not going to have operations and maintenance costs going forward as long as you leave them alone. The big thing that happens with O&M needs for residential flush mount is human interaction. So if you stay away from them, the panels will do the work and the system will do the work. Another argument is, well, it's going to be harder to sell the house. You have an asset on your home that is lowering your monthly expenditures. Often, and again, I'll go back to the real estate conversation or the realtor conversation. If the realtor takes the time to call a solar company to find out If it's a feed-in tariff system that's generating thousands of dollars a year in income, then that should be part of the conversation in selling the house. If it's a net metered system where you're offsetting your electricity consumption and, you know, bringing your hydro bill down to $20, $30 a month, that's a huge advantage compared to the street across the house, if that house is for sale as well, because your monthly expenditures are going to be far less. So it's often an education process. There aren't a whole lot of numbers in Canada right now on the real estate side of things, but if you look south of the border, NREL, they have very good numbers that, you know, they've been installing solar in the States longer than we have here. So they have more data. And that data that's being produced right now is saying that houses are selling for about 17% more and about 20% faster if they have a solar system on the roof. So it really is an education process that you need to look into when you're thinking about either buying or selling a house that has panels on it. The other one is, and it was just being touched on in the question period, which is, you know, well, I'm going to wait for a rebate. There isn't going to be a rebate. For solar residential installation, there could be a lending mechanism, either through the municipality or the federal government. But as far as a reduction in cost, there isn't a need for one. There is for battery storage, but for solar installation for residential purposes, we're already far below grid parity. So as Dan was mentioning, you know, it's half the cost of electricity to power your house with a solar system than simply pulling it from the grid. The manufacturer's warranty is for 25 years for the system, for the panels. If your return on investment is, you know, year 12, then you've just cut your electricity costs in half during the lifetime of the manufacturer's warranty. The system itself is going to last longer than 25 years. So you can look at those numbers as well as far as what your savings are going to be. But cutting your electricity costs in half, I think that's a pretty good deal. So panels have been around for a long time. It's not the flying car. It's not something that, you know, is a airy-fairy, hippy-dippy idea. It's not. Newton wrote a paper in 1904. He won the Nobel Prize in 1921, and it was for photoelectric effect. Since then, you know, 62 years ago, panels were powering satellites. So Vanguard and Sputnik have been up there for 62 years. Something I often refer to is, well, if you're under the age of 62, you've had a panel over your head for your entire existence. What's the stretch in putting it on your roof? It's not, you know, it's not something where you need to wait because the technology is going to be significantly better in the next decade. It's not. The efficiency has gone from about 16% 10 years ago to about 19 right now. The wattage has gone from about 360 to about 400 during that last decade. The big thing that took place over the last decade is the prices have plummeted. So when McGuinty shut down the coal-fired plants, it started to in 2009 and eventually did in 2013, there was a need to incentivize renewables. And that was done through the feed-in tariff program. It wasn't a rebate, but people were able to sell electricity to the grid for more than they were consuming it. The reason being, at that time, you didn't see it anywhere. So until people see it, you need to, you know, put it out there, educate the public, as well as incentivize it. And at that time, a residential solar installation cost $150,000, or, you know, in that range. Now we're down below 50, and in all likelihood, it's more like 30. So again, the need to incentivize the product is no longer a thing. If anything gets incentivized in the next little while, it'll be battery storage, because that is still quite expensive, and there's a need for it and a huge desire. So there could be a rebate there, But as far as residential solar installation, not going to happen. Lending mechanism, maybe, but rebate, it's not needed. Just back to some of the history. So in 1986 is when the large plants started going up around the planet. And then in the early 2000s is when the adoption of residential solar started to take place, mostly in places like China, Japan, Germany, the US, and the UK. What that did, that led to the reduction in price. So the reduction in price plummeted over the course of 10 years, and then it's leveled off over the course of the last 2 or 3 years. There hasn't been a huge reduction in price over the last 2-3 years. It's actually been a couple of instances where panel prices have gone up, but that was because of aluminum tariffs from the US. So in Ontario, we are allowed to net meter, which is great. So the ability to produce your own electricity locally and consume it locally is fantastic. The feed-in tariff program, while it was around, was a good idea initially, but as time went on and panel prices reduced, and they reduced the amount that you were selling back to the grid, it got to a point where you just start using it yourself, which is a globally accepted way of utilizing a solar system for residential purposes as well as commercial. So what's happening is the system is powering the building that it's on. So during daylight hours, for about 9 months of the year, 7 to 9 months of the year, you're going to power the building with the panels. Then also during daylight hours, you're going to send the excess electricity that's being produced back to the grid for a grid credit. That grid credit is good for 1 year. It's similar to having a bank account. So during daylight hours, you're making deposits into the grid. During non-daylight hours, so nighttime, particularly over the winter, that's when you're making your withdrawals. So you want to make sure that you're producing and consuming the same amount in 1 calendar year. Otherwise, you've spent too much money on the initial installation, or you're in a situation where you're offsetting a portion of your consumption, which isn't a bad situation. Offsetting a portion is fine, but you need to do the financial analysis on that to make sure it's a good idea. The hydro provider will install a bidirectional meter during the installation process. There's an expense to that, of course, but that's part of the project cost. The bidirectional meter is what calculates that excess that you're sending back to the grid. That number will be seen on your hydro bill. That's how it's calculated. And that is basically your home's calculator for electricity. There's the other question that I get all day long is, Chris, how much does it cost? Right? Brass tacks. What am I dealing with here? And the range is, quite significant. So anywhere from 15,000 to 50 for residential purposes right now. So we have to get very specific. So there's 2 ways of doing it. If you're dealing with somebody like Dan, NRCan Energy Advisor, he'll give me a gigajoule number that I have to offset with a generation number. That I can model fairly quickly. It's something that we look at the roof, we do an analysis on that. A lot of the time it's a new build, so it involves drawings. I'll get to that in a second, but the more traditional way of doing a retrofit is an analysis of the hydro bill for the house. So I look at the consumption numbers from the hydro bill, plot them into our software that will let me know what the needed generation for that building is going to be for the calendar year. Then I'm looking at shading analysis using the software as well as satellite imagery, figuring out the best orientation in relation to the sun, the best location for the panels, and lining that up with the needed generation numbers. We get very specific with shading because it's something that, this is a 25 to 35 year project. So we want to know exactly what's going to be taking place as far as making sure that we're putting the panels in the right location, making sure that the production numbers are adjusted for shading. So we have to get very, very specific on that. After that, I figure out how many panels you're going to need to offset your consumption. We're looking at, that will dictate the price of the installation. Then it's a matter of, okay, well, how are you going to finance the project? And typically it's either done through somebody's mortgage or a home equity line of credit. There's third-party lenders, but the interest rate is usually pretty high with those. The banks have tools for this. There's a really good one that's done through Manulife One. So they'll actually finance the project and allow you to pay monthly what your solar savings would be. So if your hydro bill before solar was $200 and post solar it's $20, then you can take that $180 and pay off the system with that. That's your solar savings. But you're not going to have $180 savings in the middle of winter. So Manulife One will allow you to adjust your payment plan based on the time of year. So again, there's different ways to finance systems, but that plays a role in what your return on investment year is going to look like for the system. So I mentioned the other way of doing it is, well, it's a newly built home. So I'm given a gigajoule number by Dan or another NRCan energy advisor, and I can do a model, 3D rendering based on the house plans, the site plans, the roof layout, and then the subsequent shading analysis after that. This happens quite a bit when you're doing a new build, and the majority of the net zero homes that I've done over the course of the last 5-6 years, they are new builds. So you're going into it with a gigajoule number that needs to be offset, and you can't utilize somebody's previous consumption, and often there's no house there to look at in satellite imagery. But we can still do it, right? We can still do the modeling and be accurate to meet the qualifications for a net zero house, or meet the qualifications simply if you want to be able to net meter and offset what your hydro bill is going to look like going forward. There's other challenges that we run into on the design side. So if the satellite imagery in a rural area, for instance, isn't great, which is often the case, we're able to do a combination of taking some photos and looking at the house plans, and then looking at the shading that's going to be taking place from all of that. And then we can put together a system build based on gathering all that information using the software that we have. If you're building a 6,000 to 10,000 square foot home, you're going to be in a situation where you're probably offsetting a portion of your electricity consumption. Reason for that is some of the rules and regulations that we follow with the hydro providers, the Ontario Energy Board. So right now, if you want a system that is going to be over 10 AC, that would require what's called a connection impact assessment. And we do them, and that it's a necessary step, but if we can avoid it, then we can avoid some of the expense of the initial installation. So sticking with a 10 AC nameplate capacity installation is probably a better way to go on a much larger home. If those rules and regulations at some point are no longer an issue, if some of that red tape is cut, then yes, that would change the system size that we would put on the roof for a larger home. But typically for residential purposes, you want to stick to a 10 AC. We can go up to 17 to 20 on the DC side because of the inverters that we're using currently. But you'd want to stick to 10 AC for residential purposes right now to avoid some of those regulatory costs and engineering fees. During a new build, as you can see now with the software capabilities that we have, we can do the design, place the house where it's going to be, and then figure out the shading based on that, even if there's, you know, old pictures of an old house there. So I like this one because it's kind of like, well, that's what's going to be there next year, right? And that's the system size that's going to be on that roof at that location. If you drove by there, you'd have no clue that that's even a possibility. When we're designing systems for commercial purposes, larger systems, a lot of the same rules and guidelines still apply. You're just dealing with bigger numbers. And the dollar per watt cost is lower when you're dealing with larger systems, no question about it. But again, you're going through that process with the connection impact assessment. There could be larger costs for connecting to the grid, more so than just having the hydro provider come in and install a bidirectional meter, which is typically the case for residential. There could be larger connection costs that you're dealing with when you're dealing with large-scale commercial projects. So the end users vary right now. So over the course of the last 6-7 years, what I've seen is people want it for two reasons. They want to save money, and they want to be environmentally friendly, environmental stewards. Both of those I liken to green reasons. One's cash flow and the other one is the planet. Farmers have been installing solar for quite a while because it makes a lot of sense. A lot of it has to do with their loads. So they're using a lot of electricity during the best generating times of the year. But it's also because they tend to be generational thinkers. So that's what a lot of it comes down to. Going forward, what I keep seeing is it's more middle income earners that are installing solar systems right now when they're able to get that, you know, interest rate below, say, 5%. So again, if there is something that is going to take place from either federal or potentially a municipal standpoint, financial tool for installing solar, that would be great because it would lead to mass adoption. And I believe anybody that is willing to once a week go through their garbage and recycle and put it outside would probably like to have a solar system on the roof. I could be naive there, but I think that if you're willing to go through that process every week, then you probably want to be producing your own electricity for less money than it costs to pull from the grid. So yeah, that's the end of my presentation. Please, well, Nick's going to take care of the question side of things, but if anybody's looking to get in touch, these slides will be made available through SmartNet Alliance, and there's my contact information.
Thanks so much, Chris. Fabulous to hear about some of the work you're doing and really deep dive on some of those solar installations. It's neat work. You must love getting up every day, and if you don't, I'm sure your daughters get you up anyway, right? And get you rolling. So there were a few questions that came over on chat, so I'll kind of maybe go through those, and then we can open things up for a general discussion. Mike Banks was wondering about solar air heating. Is it worth adding, as that's relatively cheap? He's wondering. Is that something you touch on?
No, that doesn't. Dan could probably speak.
Okay, so we'll circle back on that one for Dan.
Sure.
We've got someone else. Steph says, anyone know when solar tiles or something similar in Canada is coming? South is facing the street at my significant other is not pleased with solar panels.
So I can speak to that. So not happening. Tesla gave everybody their money back. So the solar shingles, great idea, nice aesthetics. but failure. So the generation from the solar shingles was not what you could get from a typical installation using regular solar panels, which Tesla still does. They install solar panels, but the solar shingles themselves. There are other companies that are doing it outside of Tesla, particularly in Europe, but the production does not line up with the cost. So the initial installation cost is, sometimes 4 times more than regular solar installation. The O&M side of it hasn't really been worked out. So we're not there yet. I don't think we will be, just simply because the way that it was being manufactured, installed was problematic the whole way through. So that's why they gave the deposits back about, I want to say 4 or 5 months ago.
Okay, well, we'll keep our eye on that. I guess it's been a bit of a tough time for Elon, but I guess he goes up and down depending on what day you hit him and what product he's rolling out, right? Because they've got so many. So Gutam's got another question. He says he's wondering, what is the payback period of a roof mount 10 AC system, assuming pure south installation in Ottawa, based on the current panel and inverter prices?
It varies anywhere between year 8 and year 17, but what I see more and more of right now, and what you're describing is an ideal scenario. Let's say the slope is somewhere between 712 and 1212, or 30 degrees and 45 degrees. No shading. Probably year 12 is a good number, because that's what I keep seeing on a regular basis in ideal scenarios. And again, so the manufacturer's warranty is for 25 years. So that's pretty easy math. You just cut your electricity costs in half.
Yeah, no, that's great. And, who knows how much that hydro is going to go up, right? It might be a steep acceleration, right? So, I know a lot of people are watching that, and, that may change the game as far as solar as well. I've traveled in California, I've traveled in Hawaii, where I see, every second house has solar. So I'd love for us to get there in Canada, and want to thank you for pushing through. A little bit about maybe you could speak a little bit about some of the models you've seen in the U.S. and through Canada, as far as the lending models that we may get to see in Ottawa, as far as the PACE systems and things like that. Can you say a few words about that?
I can. I'm wondering if Janice is available to speak to that. We had talked about potentially doing that before.
Yeah,
yeah, Chris, I'm here.
Oh, there we go.
It's Janice here from the City of Ottawa. I'm happy to speak to that if you want me to chime in. It kind of answers one of the questions that was in the chat too, although I'm going to answer with some caveats in that this is just a proposed program. But as part of the city's energy evolution strategy that will be posted publicly tomorrow, if you want to take a look at the strategy, and then going to committee on the 20th of October. Everyone's welcome to let committee know what they think of the strategy, and let their councillor know too. But anyways, as part of that, one of the projects under that is called the Residential Retrofit Accelerator Program, and the program that the first component of that sort of retrofit accelerator program that we're looking to launch is what we're calling the Better Homes Loan Program. And that's essentially similar to what they have in Toronto, the Home Energy Loan Program. It's using a local improvement charge mechanism, which will essentially allow the city to invest in people's buildings, in upgrading people's buildings, doing deep energy retrofits, and that will include solar as well. So air source heat pumps, insulation, air sealing, solar energy, a bunch of the other measures that Vivian listed there as energy efficiency measures, and add the loan for that to the property tax bill, so the property tax value, so that if and when the homeowner sells the home, that obligation to repay goes to the next, because it stays with the property, right? Because the benefit stays with the property as well. The utility bills that are lower as a result of that efficiency retrofit stay with the property. So it gets around this concern of the payback period not being long enough or being too long for the homeowner's projected planned residents in that location, in that building. So we are hopeful that we will be able to launch that program next year. 2021, we're thinking springtime. But it is contingent on funding coming from FCM. So an application has gone into the Federation of Canadian Municipalities to fund this program, to capitalize it. And if we're successful with that, then we will be launching, the City of Ottawa will be launching that Better Homes Loan Program. You can read more about it as well on the city's website if you'd like. It's all linked through the Energy Evolution website. So if you look up City of Ottawa and Energy Evolution, you can read both about the strategy as a whole, as well as the Better Homes Loan Program proposal. So I'm happy to take questions on that, but I will, will happily explain
Janice,
more and can present to this group in the future when it becomes a real deal.
Yeah, let's get you back for a full presentation. Thanks so much. Great to have a bit of a green drink scoop here on Announcement Live. I did share the YouTube page there, so I see you've got a countdown, about 13 hours away from that, and the people, if they can't tune in at 10 in the morning, will be able to watch it on replay throughout the day. So Gutem did have a question for you, Janice. He's wondering, is there any incentives for someone building green home or have built a green home, e.g. tax incentives?
So there's a couple things. And not to get into the full details here because I know it's Chris's show here, but there is what we're calling the High Performance Development Standard, is another sort of program under the Energy Evolution strategy that is to encourage high performing new construction. So that will be for new construction. If you already have a home, the retrofit, and you're looking at retrofits, that's where the Better Homes Loan Program comes in.
Very exciting. You know, we've been asking for this in Ottawa for quite a while, and Janice, you and your team are obviously been doing some great work. You know, we hope to see Smart Alliance, we hope to see it spur a lot of innovation and a lot of people to say, you know, now is the time. I know we all work at the Collective Impact Group and they're firing back up. They want to get a neighborhood model going. And I think it's a time for a lot of people to say, you know what, the time is right to do a renewable energy retrofit. The investments there, you can borrow money in different ways, as we're going to find out tomorrow. So, you know, now's the time to get those heat pumps and those solar panels going. So I want to just open it up for any other questions. Did anybody have any other questions for Chris and Janice before we do a bit of a general discussion? And I know Mary's got some questions in chat there. Mary, will maybe do a bit of a general discussion. Well, yes, we like to save the last part as a bit of a general discussion for everybody to chat a little bit and talk about some of their ideas. But I do want to end the formal presentation here, so we can hit record or stop on the record button, and we'll get that out on YouTube in a couple weeks. We do have our older versions of the virtual green drinks for you to check out. So, you know, if you want to go for all night long until the Energy Evolution thing, you'd probably have just enough programming to do that. Maybe get a few hours sleep in there. So